Welcome to Leadership Line of Sight. My name is Taylor, and I'll be your host today like I am each episode, where we talk to dynamic people that are calling out to the leader in you. Today, we have an incredible guest. We have Sarah Hamilton with us. She is a city councillor in Edmonton, Alberta, with an extensive background in both communications and public service. I'm excited to talk to her, so much so that I'm not even going to delay anymore. Sarah, you have done so much so fast, and it's interesting to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us on Leadership Line of Sight.
Well, thank you for having me. You're an amazing hype man. I wish you could introduce me every time I go somewhere.
I got to do better at like my Little John. Like I got to get like a good like, yeah. Well, I'm so happy to have you here because there's so much to unpack. First of all, I know that you grew up in the city that you serve now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, how is that something like, as part of growing up here, you went to the University of Edmonton, University of Alberta, and then transitioning into being a leader here, this seems to be something that started very young with you. Is that the case?
I think in some ways it was. My parents are very dedicated community volunteers. Public service is really important to them. I've told the story of my mom taking my brother and I door knocking. They were proud to put the lawn signs of people that they supported on our front lawn. So politics was never something to shy away from or not discuss. And whenever we saw not just the success of political leaders and community leaders, but when we saw them struggle and fail sometimes, as happens, my parents were really keen on talking about why they saw that happen, what we were seeing, what were maybe some of the problems that led to somebody not being successful in leadership.
So this is something that I think that we need to unpack, because when most people are talking about politics, they like them or they don't like them. But how do you decide if they've actually done a good job?
My own metric is, how much do you have to think about it? And at the municipal level, it's a very interesting, that's a very interesting challenge, because 80% of our day-to-day is our city. It doesn't matter what city we live in. The minute you leave your front door, is the waste being picked up? Are the streets clean? Is there a park nearby where you can go? Are there pools where kids can take swimming lessons? Are the roads being fixed? These kinds of things we deal with in every city. And I find that the more you think about it, the more you're actually reflecting on the success of your leaders. So I think that could apply provincially, federally as well. If you're having to think about too hard about how to get to work because the roads aren't safe or because the transit isn't working, then that's a leadership issue in your community. If you're having to think too carefully about your children's education, or what post-secondary opportunities there are for you, that I think is a reflection on your leadership. So I think I kind of compare it to drywall. When it's good, you don't notice it, right? And when it's not good, you definitely can see it.
Okay, this is a really interesting perspective. So that I'm hearing you correctly, is what you're saying that a leader's job is to take these things off your plate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so when you think about how the community serves the families that live inside of it, we do think about things like, it is a great measurement of a community to say how many children were able to learn how to swim, because that's not part of the school program. So it would be having to be outside of that in a way that it's made up or made available to the community members. Is that correct?
I think so. And I think to every community, there's different metrics. Geographically, to every, I'm going to say, user group, families are going to have different metrics of success than your business community. But I think about leadership being, and I think we're probably going to use a lot of metaphors during this hour, but
I love it.
You end up, it is about taking stuff off people's plate. It's about being an umbrella, shielding them from from some of the tough things, you know, and being able to provide or accommodate them in some way, what they need, not exposing them to some of the harsher elements of I guess, things going on. I'm not being really specific, but I think about, yeah, your job as a leader is to make your residents' lives easier, the people who work for you, their job easier. And oftentimes when those things get hard, it's because there's an issue at the top. It's because your governance isn't clear. Your mission and values aren't clear.
Yeah, and that's actually maybe the thing that I noticed is that when politicians weren't doing a good job, they apply with a resume of things that they're going to do, and then it turns into a mandate. And how far did they get up that list, right? Because I think that that's why people change their leadership is they want a new set of ideas, or they want someone who's going to do a better job at the things that we're already trying to get done. I know something you've been a great champion of in the past is transportation.
Yeah. So one of the major infrastructure projects going into West Edmonton is West Valley Line LRT. I can tell you I have residents who are very divided on this. I have folks who are very excited to welcome a multi-billion-dollar project that will mean that their kids can get to school easier. That means that they don't have to get in a car so that they can get downtown or to major shopping areas. But I have other residents who say, you know, you're not building this for me. You're building, like, it's not going to make my life easier. What I like to, plus they, you know, there's the natural concern that they have to pay for it. Edmonton is projected to grow to about 2 million people over the next 30 to 40 years. And that averages out to a growth rate of about 1.5% each year. When you are talking about doubling the population of your city, people have to live somewhere. The city committed through our municipal development plan that 50% of that growth would happen in areas that already exist, what would be called brownfield or infield growth. And that means that you need to enhance your transportation system. You know, so you have to, I don't want to say make compromises, because I don't believe it's a compromise. I think people are feeling stretched. There's been a lot of talk about inflation right now. People are feeling stretched. There's more demand than ever on cities to provide services to residents, and we have to kind of figure out a way to make it fit. So when folks are skeptical about, for instance, the project oversight, there's been a lot of issues with LRT delivery across Canada. I go back to them with accountability. We meet bi-monthly and talk about all the issues that we're hearing about. And we hear project updates, whether we need it or not. And when they talk about, you know, this isn't for me, what I say is, I hear that this is for the person. I'm taking the person on the road in front of you off the road. I'm giving them options. So you don't have to take that option. But if they're, you know, if the population, if your commute's going to double, I want to make sure that someone else has the opportunity to take a public transit, and that's a reasonable mode of getting around the city. And I think that resonates with people because, I mean, it frames up those decisions as legacy decisions, which they are. Like a transportation infrastructure is generational. We know from other cities that they last for almost hundreds of years.
Yeah, I feel really closely related to this because I'm also a member of the real estate industry. So seeing how these communities grow, it's like branches of a tree. And when you also consider migration, we need more people, right? Like when it comes down to Edmonton being a flourishing city, really having more people move here is going to be key to that. And a lot of people don't really understand the struggle. Like this is one of the lowest population densities in all of North America. So right now, the perception from moving from other places is that you need a car to live here. And in many cases, you do. And that takes a whole layer of potential great community members out of our opportunity pool, right?
Mm-hmm. And something that I also like to talk about is optionality. Like for most people, especially I'm going to say people over the age of 30, if they own a car now, they're probably going to own a car for the rest of their life. What I say to them is, I want on one of those like great Edmonton winter days where you wake up and there's 3 feet of snow on the ground, I want you to have the option that if you're like, I don't want to go out, like I don't want to drive today, you can grab transit if you need to get to work. You have good like broadband and internet infrastructure if you're going to work from home. And if you need milk or bread, we've all had that morning you wake up and you're missing something. You need to go get a coffee. You just want to go out. There's something in your neighborhood for you to go to. You don't have to get in your car if it's not your day. And conversely, we've all had those beautiful Edmonton days where you're like, I don't want to get in my car. I want to ride a bike. I want to go for a walk. So optionality is really important. And I think whatever your choice is, having that, I think, makes us a more attractive city.
I would totally agree. And I like how your view of leadership is in this case, where you're saying that, a community without options is a community in trouble. A community without the option to not drive means that all of the great people that would not take that choice, they don't live there. They chose other places. Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. When I kind of draw back to where you were moving through, it sounds like your parents did a great job in instilling service, an attitude of service or a requirement for service in you. Where was the first? Okay.
I'm laughing. So ask your question.
Well, so where did it start to go from the things you were doing with them to starting to do things on your own? Like, where were your first points where you were volunteering without your folks?
And I'm laughing because this is the first thing that came to mind. My parents did a really good job of instilling service in me, but as with most teenagers, it sometimes came really reluctantly. So I was always involved in like team sports. And then around the time I hit 15 or 16 years old, you just like don't want to do anything, right? You just want to hang out with your friends and kind of like be a bit of a bum, for lack of a better term, in the summer. You just want to kind of like bum around and enjoy the beautiful weather, and that's a good thing. However, I remember, I want to say I was 14 and I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna kind of like snooze away the summer. And my dad came home one day and was like, oh, I heard your best friend is volunteering at the YMCA for the summer. And I was like, yeah, like good luck. And he's like, so I signed you up as well. And I just like that sinking feeling like, oh man, now I got to go volunteer for 3 weeks in the summer. And I loved it. I loved it more than I thought I would. I was working with young kids, helping in day camps, so that when the fall came, I wasn't ready to let it go. And I was really lucky in that organization wasn't ready to let me go either. And they used that as an opportunity to like have me teach classes for little kids, have me be an educator. And so the next summer, when I was thinking of something to do, I think of 9 weeks of summer, I volunteered for 8. I was so enthusiastic, and it helped me. I think that's a good thing to reflect on, because I ended up learning things about myself. I ended up learning things about how to lead like a group of 6 to 12-year-olds. Like, I don't know how teachers do it every day, but like I learned that, and I learned stuff about our city. Like we went on field trips. I learned about health and safety requirements. All these things that as a 14 or 15-year-old you wouldn't be that interested in. That was my forced education. And then through the rest of my teenage years, someone would say, do you want to volunteer in a magazine, or do you want to volunteer? I was a volunteer at Fort Edmonton Park for a number of years. Those are really valuable formative experiences.
Oh, my wife is ranting and raving about Fort Edmonton Park right now because they're doing their dark exposition, and it's just amazing. But that's also something I really think that our city does well, is we put on some killer festivals, and like I always find that cold places make warm people. and Edmonton just has some of the warmest.
It does, and I think that's what's really, to come sort of around to that question of leadership. There's some thinking that because we're either remote or cold or both, we find opportunities for each other, and I know that can feel and can be a fairly sort of privileged concept, but I don't think I've ever lived in a city where you could reach out to people, and they would say, they'll sit down for coffee with you. And it doesn't matter if they're leading a major company in the city or a journalist at the local paper. Like, people will just talk to you. They're really collaborative. And I think characteristic to the city is we want to see each other succeed. And out of that, there's a lot of opportunities for youth, a lot of opportunities for volunteerism and community-driven leadership.
That's interesting. And also, it sounds like you had some time at a magazine. What took you into your major in journalism?
So I got some very interesting career advice at one point. I did my undergraduate work in art history, and I was looking at something wasn't feeling right in those like first 2 years out of school. I wasn't feeling connected to the work I was doing, and one of my mentors was like, well, why don't you do some work? Like, why don't you write just sort of weekly columns for, we used to have these weekly arts newspapers in Edmonton, like View and See Weekly. So why don't you start doing some work for them? And it allowed me to reconnect with my love of writing. It allowed me to reconnect with my love of art. And I was looking at graduate school, and I did get the advice, don't focus on the craft, focus on enriching your level of knowledge and your critical thinking skills. So I didn't quite go to school for journalism. I ended up going to graduate school for critical, visual and critical studies. So I kind of doubled down on art history and writing through a program at the school, the Art Institute, which I absolutely love. But it's an interesting sort of bookend. Journalism, I think, is meant to be really accessible, highly communicative, and academia and theory, I think, can sometimes be quite the opposite. So for me, it was always about how do you bring these really complex issues into a forum that not only people understand, but care about. And I think that skill translates really well in government and politics, because so many of the things we talk about are opaque, hard to understand, inside baseball. And my former colleague Scott McKean would always chastise our administration for not using plain language, like pull it into the realm of the real for people, and find a way to make them care about it.
Yeah, almost like when people do too much clever and not enough clear.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. That's got to be a really powerful tool now. Like, you seem like you're almost studying groups of people from the outside. Like, art history is also like, it's a view into archaeology. Like it's a view into sociology.
Absolutely. And even the art that we know, there's a reason that we know it. And I think so much of the practice of art history today is about taking apart that architecture. Why do we know the Mona Lisa? Why do we know Leonardo da Vinci? And then there's lesser known artists like Artemisia Gentileschi. Just as a sort of a really high level example, as well as, you go into some of the later issues. Picasso is sort of exalted as this incredible artist, and yet he drew so much of his inspiration and his reference material from African craftsmanship, from the craftsmanship of women, and that's not sort of properly credited or given the same level of credit. And so it is about understanding, and I think this is also powerful in government and leadership, understanding that things don't just exist, they become a way for a reason. And if things can be built up, they can be deconstructed, they can be changed. And that's a very empowering thing I think people need to know. There's not just sort of a natural way that things are.
It's so interesting, these hidden stories, right? Like when people think about an example of like a great painter, they're going to pull up Picasso. And they might even assume that he was the best one because of how we hold him as a status.
Mm-hmm.
And there's stories behind that of other people that contributed to that success. And it seems to be like it's never one person. Like whenever we hold an example, it's like them standing on the shoulders of giants, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, art is full of that. Most of the great masters actually had workshops. So the work that they have done is actually physically made by a half dozen or a dozen people whose names are rarely credited. I remember one of my friends telling me an anecdotal story about the mid-century artist Klaus Oldenburg, and he did these sort of inflatable or plush large-scale versions of Americana, a hamburger, for instance, or I'm trying to remember another one. The hamburger comes to mind. And his mother had gone to school with Klaus Oldenburg and was always, first to remark that Klaus Oldenburg didn't sew his own sculptures. It was his wife who did so, but she isn't credited in the work. So that is also a very important leadership lesson. Just like in film, no director makes a film alone, with very rare exception. There's a team of people behind you. And so when you get the credit, how is that empowering the people who work with you? When you are successful for leading folks, how does that trickle down to them? Or flow down, I should say. It shouldn't trickle, it should flow.
Yeah, that's actually something that I hear what you're saying in that, where it seems like the recognition has to have a focal point, but how that person deals with it is the game changer, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I know that I'd read from the CEO of Home Depot that they were viewing leadership as an inverted triangle. Everybody else sees a leader on top of a triangle, and basically in this example, it was business, and they would say the clients are served by the staff who serve the leader, but he says it's upside down. He says the clients should be on the top, or in your case, it'd be the citizens, and then the people that serve them, or your team, and then the leader is serving that team in order to serve those citizens. Is that the same way you grab it?
Yeah, I would see it that way. I think that sounds a lot to me like the theory of servant leadership, that you're, as a leader, you're there to empower everyone else in the mix. And it also strikes me as that sort of leaders eat last piece, that you make sure everyone else's needs are cared for before sort of helping yourself. Though I think that's probably an interesting concept we could come back to at some point, because I think a lot of people don't set boundaries around that either, and you get leadership burnout, which I think we've seen in the last 2 years. And if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't watch out or take care or effectively lead others. So I think that's also.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean regarding leadership for others. When it comes down to whether or not you put the mask on, like the example of the airplanes, where make sure to put your own mask on before you try to help someone else, because otherwise you're not going to really be help at all. I think that there is a fair chance that we have something frozen here. So let's see if we can get Sarah back. I'm going to go full screen while that's changing, just for those people that are tuning into the live stream. And thank you guys so much for joining us. I find it so interesting to see how people's perspectives are formed. You know, obviously, Sarah has been in a situation where her family was helping her understand what was going on when it comes to politics around her, when it comes to service. And that's something that doesn't happen in many families. I know when I was growing up, talking about the government in general, like it was one of those three in the trifecta. You shouldn't talk about money, you shouldn't talk about politics, and you shouldn't talk about religion. And I think that that ended up making a whole series of people really less informed, right? Less informed on what's going on around them. Thank you. It looks like we got a little bit interrupted there. To recap, I like your perspective. I like how you're talking about this being part of your growing up, developing this understanding of how things work. But it really leads me to this point where I wonder, like, at what point were other people either recognizing you as a leader or you starting to see that in yourself?
I think I still struggle with that. I mean, when I started to get involved in politics in 2014, seriously, people would look at me in meetings and say, "You're going to run one day." And I would openly laugh, like absolutely not. When I was asked to run, and there's something about women in politics, that women need to be asked 4 times on average in order to consider running. Um, uh, so the first time I was asked, I had that number in mind. And I was asked seriously to consider running for city council. And I never, like, to be honest, I'd been involved in provincial and federal politics, and that was my wheelhouse. And I hadn't really thought about municipal government. So I took it seriously, but I literally like looked around, like, are you talking to me? And it was like, yeah, of course I'm talking to you. And so I took it really seriously. The second time I was asked, I was like, well, I got to take it seriously now, because do I want to hit 4? Or do I need 2 more people to ask me before I'm even going to start to think about it? But I think I initially really struggled with the big why. I think anyone can lead, but I think that everyone who is asked to probably ask themselves, or should ask themselves, why me? And what can I do? What can I bring to this that other people can't? Like, why? Like, yeah. And I think leadership in any form is it's a sacrifice. It means that there's going to be things you're not going to be able to do. It means sometimes obligations with your family and friends that you're not going to meet. So I think that why has to be really compelling for you.
For sure. I love the question of can I contribute or how can I contribute? That's very powerful, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing I don't think that people would look at from the outside is this changes everything. It changes how everybody around you relates to you.
Yeah, and there's a really good story in the book, Who Thought This Was a Good Idea? And Other Questions You Should Have Answers For, by Alyssa Mastromonaco, who was one of the key organizers and staffers to President Barack Obama. And she talks about this moment where she sends an email, and it's just a little bit terse, but it rippled through the organization because it was no longer coming from her, it was coming from the deputy chief of staff. And so she hadn't changed. Well, the story as she tells it is that she kind of apologized to everyone, but the president called her into the office and pointed out that you don't change, but the way people see you changes. And there's the old Teddy Roosevelt adage, walk softly and carry a big stick. All of a sudden, once you're in an elected position, it's like everything you say, even the quietest, most delicate things, get blasted through a megaphone. And that doesn't always land the way that you intend it to. And so you have to internalize, I'm not going to say softness because I don't think that's the right term, but you have to internalize, you know, not what you intend, but how others might receive the message that you're delivering, and be really deliberate in how you interact with people, how you interact with your staff, how you interact with the public. Because for a lot of people, I want to say very few people meet their elected officials. So when they do have the opportunity to, you want it to be a positive and ideally meaningful experience.
That's a lot of pressure. Because
Yeah.
you come in contact with your constituents at like the grocery store.
Yes. Yeah.
And for me, I know enough people that I've done this shuffle where you see somebody and you're like, I know that person. I'm going to need 2 aisles to recall them. And off you go. Right.
Not just that, but like, you know, there's Monday morning, Sarah, when I've had a shower and a coffee. And then there's, you know, Sunday night, the person whose hair is up, glasses are on. I'm just trying to get things like ready for the week, you know, sweatpants, that kind of thing. And so you're not always caught at your best moment. Like you're not always, not camera ready, but you're not always ready to interact with people. And you have to figure out how to negotiate those boundaries. And it's different for everyone.
Yeah, you got to find someone to turn your wicket off. Like, hey, this line's closed. It's Sunday night. I'm trying to grab food. There's kids to feed and all this other stuff going on.
Exactly.
Do you ever get that opportunity to shut off yourself, or is this something that has occupies you all the time?
I think it's really important for leaders to set boundaries, to refresh, to rest, because I don't think we bring our best selves to our work if we are tired, if we are frustrated, if we're overwhelmed. And I learned that the hard way in my first year on council, that just as it was important for me to dig in and go, it was just as important for me to go on vacation, to spend time with my family, to sleep in, to see other cities, to see other countries, to read, honestly, to read fiction. And that in that process, I brought my better self back to the conversations. I saw the world and the work in a different light. Something that I talk to a lot of people about, especially in politics and government, is that it's never just the or. It's not like you had a bad night of sleep, or there's a lot going on at work today, or that, you know, you have a lot of events this week. It's the and. It's all of it. It's you had a bad night of sleep and your kid has pink eye. And your normal babysitter is away, and also your back-to-back meetings, and your spouse's back-to-back meetings, and then someone gets on the phone with you, and they're having their bad week, and your leadership moment is: do you respond to their frustration, anger, aggression with that in kind, or are you able to say, "I'm not my best self right now. I have all of these ands on my plate, and either I need to get back with you," or to understand it, acknowledge it, and see their frustration for what it is, and just meet that emotion. And I think that takes a long time as a leader to get comfortable with. And I know this about myself. I know this about other people, and I still struggle with it because it can be hard on those weeks where it feels like the plate is too full and no one's taking it off your plate.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing that's looked past in leaders is, what are they like at 12%? Right? Like at 12% is like almost anybody can do the job when it's going smoothly and when they're at 100%. Right? If they're like that, that is fine. But that is rarely the case. In fact, most of the time we stretch the people that are leaders, because a leader in my mind is the person that everyone has consensus is help. The person that is the that can help the group the most is often who people will defer to as the leader. And then at 12%, especially under the example that you were giving us, which is how are you going to deal with meaningful conflict? But that's also a big part of most leadership stories. What is your process for dealing with conflict?
I think it depends on the type of conflict. I don't think that there is a single formula. But I'll say that I got a really good piece of advice from one of my grad school advisors, which was like, don't respond to emails after 8 p.m. because I'm a big believer in decision fatigue and decision theory. And I know that by 8 p.m. or 6 p.m., depending what time of day or what time of the morning you get up, but by later in the day, you're not in your best decision-making capacity. And so, the first question is, can this wait? Is there an opportunity to revisit this with a fresh set of eyes? And I find, I'm going to say 9 times out of 10, the aggressive emails, the criticism that I feel is especially pointed, the frustrations I have a different lens on them once I've had a good night's sleep and something, and breakfast and coffee. So that's one of them. It's, that getting that distance from the issue, understanding how it's impacting you and the frame of mind you're in. The second is, especially with the public, I think it's about hearing the frustration. I think that there are absolutely boundaries when it comes to respectfulness. And I think there's been a lot of conversation in public about how we interact with our political institutions and the people that we elect to represent us. And so I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to set that aside. But when someone is genuinely frustrated, sometimes hurting, I think hearing that, seeing that, acknowledging that validates the experience that they have. Something I talked about a couple months ago in another interview was that when we don't validate people's feelings, it's not like those go away. It's like if they're feeling cash strapped, if they're feeling like their government isn't working for them, that feeling doesn't go away by you saying, no, it's like, it's okay, we are, or here's five ways we are. If they don't feel it, then it just, for them, feels like you're gaslighting them. And I think that gets into a really tricky place with people because they're going to find somebody who validates them. And I would rather it be me. I would rather it be, moderate leadership than somebody who's bringing, I think, more dangerous ideas to the table. So, sorry, go ahead.
No, I like that. I really think it's important that people feel heard. So many people, when they think that they are in conflict, instead of seeing that someone brought conflict with them, like that person is in conflict. And now, since they come to you, their conflict comes with them. And really, when what you were talking about there is so many people can't ever move on to where they're talking about facts until they're done talking about feelings.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, I don't think we can also say that your feeling is wrong. It might be unfounded. Like there might be more information that can maybe help in some way. But I really think that that's like the diffusing of that conflict bomb is, does that person feel as though you have received what they're trying to tell you?
Absolutely. And I want to, I'll reiterate what you just said, because I think it's such an excellent point. You cannot talk facts until you work through the feelings. And I learned that early, and I learned that the hard way. And, there's many circumstances in the early part of my career that I wish I could go back and redo. But it was also really valuable because, that's now not a mistake that I will make again.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Can you talk about where you feel as though you've gained growth through failure?
Yeah, actually. I so it was almost exactly 4 years ago, and it was my and moment. It was um I and we'll get like some of this is personal stuff. My and moment, I was having trouble sleeping, and um so I was sort of going between doctors to figure out, or I had like these terrible headaches. I was going between doctors to figure out what the cause of it was. I had a negative interaction with a doctor who implied that I needed to lose weight, which was not something I received very well. um, and I had a number of communities that were really struggling with processes. I had one that was losing its transit, um, and and was struggling to engage on getting a on-demand service, which we got for them eventually. And I had another community that was getting a utility line that and in Alberta, you'll know that utilities are regulated provincially. So they felt that the city and I needed to do something. And we're in the middle of a 4 year budget. And I was traveling a lot for work. So all of these issues stacked up. And I got into a meeting with someone at the end of a long day. And this person, as I'm like taking a bite of food, makes a wisecrack about, you can't eat like that forever. And you're like, just like boom, right?
Wow.
And yeah, and like it still makes me angry to this day.
Hmm.
But uh, instead of taking that moment and saying, there is a lot going on in my life right now, and they are not connected. Somebody's rude, out of touch comment is not connected to my also rude, out of touch doctor, which is not connected to all, like, it's not connected to budget. It's not connected to, like, but I wasn't able to kind of piece it apart. What I did instead was I went inside myself. I like closed up, and um, and I became hostile in conversations. I never stopped working for people. I never stopped trying to solve the problem. But, I want to say the very next day, I went into a meeting with the community group where the utility line was going in, and someone made a wisecrack. Well, if you can't get this done for us, we'll just fire you. Like next election, you're gone. And there's 3 years left in the term. And it's like, hi, how are you? And that's the first thing. Instead of saying, nowadays someone says that to me, it rolls off my back. It's like, okay, like that's your prerogative, but we got 3 more years to try and solve this, so are we going to work together or not? um uh but instead I stormed out of the meeting. And that was, you know um like, I'm still, I still regret how I handled that. I've tried to repair with the community, but you don't come back from that with people. And I think, had I sort of heard that and received it, had I not taken that so personally, had I think, recognized my own boundaries and limits there, I would have handled that, all of those situations, so much differently.
When you're looking
Um,
from your own perspective, it looks like everybody is attacking you, right? And so at one point you have to like strike back, but who you strike back at, like I can see why this was such a powerful moment. You were talking before about how people have such few actual legitimate interactions with their government. For that to be one of them, think of how many positive interactions it would take to try to balance that out. And you're saying that those opportunities aren't really as available, so that just happened and it just is.
it just is. And um, uh, yeah, and it takes a lot to get that back for people. I heard more recently that it discouraged people from getting involved in their community. And you know, On the flip side, I think something that we need to figure out as leaders is how to hold people accountable for decorum. And part of that is how you set the table on that. And in a public space, it can be really tough because people come at you with strong emotions. And we can even talk about, sometimes people come at you with rudeness. They come at you with obscenity or vulgarity. And you can't internalize that, but you do have to set boundaries. Something, I think a message that it sends if you say like, hey, I understand you're frustrated, but it's not okay to talk to people that way. It's not just about me. It's about you as a leader setting an expectation for how we treat each other in this room, how we treat each other in this context. And if we flip to social media where there's a very live conversation about politicians blocking people, and you know, what's the limit? Some feedback I got last term, and I thought this was really good, was when you validate that through you know, sort of not touching those comments, when you validate that behavior by the absence of any kind of response or reaction, you are sending a message to other people who want to participate that they're not welcome there. That only if you're hostile, only if you're mean, only if you're cruel and personal, then is there a place for you. And so I think if we're trying to elevate the level of discussion and we want good people in leadership, you have to set a tone that when it becomes personal, whether it's about you or anyone else, there's a boundary there. We don't talk to people that way. We don't treat people that way. We're here to work together towards a common solution, not tear each other down.
Yeah, so we become such more of a civil society in some ways, where in those moments where somebody says something vicious, nobody hits them, right? Like we got to that step. And I really feel as though as humans, we rose from savagery, we didn't fall from civility. Like we're a work in progress. But now we have this other balance of that Twitter culture where, like, you know, the YouTube comments are a dumpster fire. And the truth is that those people feel that way inside. But you're totally right in saying that so many people, they feel as though reasonable takes a second seat to like outrageous or severe. And so then the reasonable people feel as though they don't get heard because those other voices do get reactions, but they're also getting responses, which is, I think, that what we need to change is we should respond less to the people that don't know how to interact in those places.
And I think, you know, that leads into a really interesting question or discussion of what role do social media algorithms play in amplifying the controversial, amplifying the radical versus the reasonable. I think, I want to say 10 years ago, there was some work done on how Facebook wouldn't show you things you disagreed with. So it kind of started to figure out, and this is 10 years ago, it was figuring out the things that would keep you on the platform. It didn't want the tough discussions. And I think we've seen the fruits of that in the last 5 years, and it's not elevated the discourse in Canada or the United States. It's not elevated the discourse in our own communities. It's in fact isolated us from sort of diverse perspectives. It's isolated us from our ability to have hard conversations and live amongst each other. If you go back 50 or 60 years, your community was largely geographic, sometimes faith-based, sometimes cultural. But you probably worked or lived amongst people who had really diverse perspectives or backgrounds. And you shared a common news source, especially in Canada, where you maybe had 2 or 3 channels on your television. You may have 1 or 2 local papers. Maybe there's an alternative weekly or another form of news, but your physical community was broad and the sources of information were narrow. That's inverted now. There's as many sources of news and information as there are people. And yet our communities have become smaller. And I think, especially at the municipal level, I don't think we're better for it. But I think one of our powers, because we're so geographically oriented, is empowering people to connect with their neighbors again, empowering people to connect with their community and those shared values.
Yeah, it's so tough because so many people are forming their opinion and then going to the internet looking for support for it. Like that's how research is done, as opposed to going to the internet for research and then forming their opinion. We saw this dominate everything during COVID, and that must have been an incredible amount of pressure on people that are in your position.
It was, I mean, if a close second and one of the hardest moments in this job was COVID. It was relentless. At municipal level, we don't, in Alberta, you don't have access to an independent health authority. We don't have a health body that advises City Council, and we don't have a lot of powers through the Municipal Government Act to take action. And yet it's a very dynamic situation constantly. So we were constantly having to react. We were constantly having to sort of wonder what other orders of government were going to do, and with very few resources. The only, I'm not going to say the only power we had, but one of the few powers we had was to sort of provide a sense of calm, direct people to resources, and not escalate the situation. And it's, you know, we had, I want to say 12 weeks of the state of local emergency in the city of Edmonton. And then the week that we didn't renew the state of local emergency, the following week, we had Black Lives Matter protests across Edmonton. It was immediately following the death of George Floyd. And it was, and you can remember, it was such a gutting moment. It was just horrific to see. And it still chokes me up. And for so many leaders across North America at that time, including locally, everyone was just depleted. Because most jurisdictions were dealing, and I don't want to speak too much for other people, but at that time, you're like, you know, your bank is empty. You have not a lot to give in a really difficult situation for the community to navigate.
Yeah, that's something that like a lot of people don't see as far as the pressure goes. And we've talked a little bit about where that took you and what that changed in you. It sounds like you are much more understanding of the situation of those people around you having gone through things like this. And also that you've developed such great coping mechanisms to recharge yourself and to bring back, and also to realize when you should engage less. These are fantastic lessons for the people that follow behind you. What do you think about when you see maybe a 16-year-old girl that reminds you of yourself? What things do you think that they should maybe consider that they would like as tools on the path to leadership?
Well, I mean, it's really sort of reflecting on, if you did things differently, what would you have done if you did things, you know, if you had a do-over? That's really what the question is. I think I learned the lesson about taking a break too late. And I say that because I was like, and we talked about this earlier in the conversation, I was volunteering, I was working full time, I was going to school. When I went to post-secondary, you know, I did the full course load. I was just like, and working and go, 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 go. And now I hear about folks who did, you know, they went on trips, they went backpacking. And so by the time I hit 24, 25, I felt like I felt like I knew a lot, but I hadn't experienced a lot. And I ended up kind of breaking away from my career path and taking a couple of years. I moved to the States. I tried to pursue writing more seriously. And I feel like if I had maybe figured out just a little bit earlier how to sort of step back, how to sort of have different sort of world experiences, I may have approached that situation differently. I may have approached it more productively. But I felt like I just sort of came into that situation absolutely depleted. And to a certain extent, set myself back in a way. So things are going to catch up with you. I think that's also, if you don't take care of yourself, eventually it catches up with you. And I think a lot of people run a deficit on self-care, but it always gets paid back one way or another. And that would be the lesson, like, surround yourself
in
with
my
good
mind,
people.
it always looks like the you that you are right now can't actually exist on the next level. You have to like carve the things away that can't make it there in order to make it there. And if I'm hearing you right, it's that you felt as though you didn't contribute enough to yourself early on. And so maybe there was some incomplete elements that later you took a break to complete, and now you've returned.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because it, like, I think everyone has this in the course of their life. There's these things that exist. I'll never do this, or I can never get over this. I'll always be this way. And I think I would encourage anyone to examine those, I'm going to say, those stories we tell about ourselves, those myths, because they're often, I found, at least in my life, those are the things that held me back. Those were the things that were cutting off a lot of opportunity. We talked about one earlier in this broadcast, which was, I'm never going to run for office. I'll never do that. I'm not fit to do it. And then once I let go just a little bit of the I never, it became the, well, why not? What would it take? What would you bring to the job? What would you do differently? Why you? And it opened up a huge world of possibility for me. And I'll talk about a lot of jobs I've really enjoyed in my life. This is my favorite.
Well, I can tell why. Like, even in our interactions, what I see in you is that this incredible development of decisiveness. You like, once you choose a direction, this is it, right? The other thing that I'm hearing from you is that it's based on communication and empathy. And I think that that's such a great tool set to do what you do, which is serve the public. What do you look at when you look forward now? When you take a look at the next few years for you, what do you feel as though you're building towards?
Oh, that's a tough question. I think a lot of, I'm not just going to pigeonhole women on this, but I go back to Canada 2020 did a bunch of interviews with former female first ministers across Canada, and talked to a lot of leaders, especially first ministers, premiers, former prime ministers, prime minister, I should say, never saw their outcome as being political. They just want to help their community. I similarly, for me, the outcome isn't necessarily political. But if I look at what I want for my community, what I want for my city and my province, I want us to be prosperous. I want us to be a great place to live. Even as other areas of Canada are struggling with things like housing affordability and quality of education, I want to bring as much investment and economic opportunity into this province and this city, so that kids growing up today don't have to I want them to look at other places, but I don't want it to mean that they have to. I want them to see this city as a place where they can have an opportunity that they could have anywhere else, that we're not limiting them just by being born here.
I totally agree. I think that if communities see future opportunity, they see potential. And I think the world is really seeing the potential of us right now. Like, one, when it comes from an affordability standpoint or from the place to start things, this is the place to start things.
Absolutely. And we talk about that culture of collaboration in Edmonton. I think, obviously, I think that we're great collaborators. We talk about, people making these amazing connections, whether they're leading companies or NGOs. They'll meet with you and they'll talk through your ideas. And I think we're a city that wants to lift each other up and help each other be successful. Housing, you're in real estate, housing affordability across Canada is an issue, especially, I'm going to say, the dream for a lot of people of owning their own home. And we see that in other provinces, and that's still something that you can do in Edmonton, you can do in Alberta. And I don't want us to lose the value of that, because that's what I think a lot of people work towards in their life. So, like, I think we're really quick to get down on the weather. I lived in Chicago, and so I'm a sunny side person. I think we have great light here. We have 4 seasons, beautiful sunshine. It's a beautiful sunny day today, and really, really exceptional people.
I couldn't agree more. Warm people come from cold places. And thank you so much for sharing with us today. You shared some great personal moments and some great professional moments. I know that you talked a lot about the challenges that you've overcome, but man, you are an overcomer of challenges. Like, the you that you've made through that is really incredible. And I've seen you in a boardroom, and I can tell, the leadership stands out there. You really know how to get vibrant conversation moving. You know how to evaluate your resources, take direction, and deliver. And that was something that was really incredible to see in action.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
This has been Leadership Line of Sight, and I have been here with the amazing Sarah Hamilton. She is a city councillor of the city of Edmonton, a great Edmontonian, and a gifted communicator. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
This has been Leadership Line of Sight. My name is Taylor Hack. I am the marketing strategist at Gravidia. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a remarkable day.